A soldier, one of our own, has shared an astonishing testimony of spending 30 years in hell, encountering notable figures from history. This is the experience of Sergeant Jimmy Mir Tun, a 38-year-old Marine who has served in the United States Marine Corps for 15 years. Over those years, he faced relentless challenges, intense firefights, patrolling frozen hills, and narrowly escaping bomb explosions. Each day in his uniform reminded him of his duty to his country and his fellow Marines, and for Jimmy, the Marine Corps had become a way of life. Every mission, he carried a cherished photograph of his 8-year-old son, Ryan. With his bright smile and zest for life, Ryan was Jimmy's anchor, giving him strength to return home safely. On what would become his final mission, Jimmy felt a heavy tension unlike any he had felt before. The assignment was dangerous: penetrate deep into enemy territory to secure a critical checkpoint, a move that would significantly impact the battlefield. As he and his team prepared, an eerie silence hung in the air. The tension was palpable, but no one spoke about the dangers they were heading into. Jimmy and his team rolled out in convoy, each man consumed by his own thoughts and the weight of their task. Within moments of making contact, the situation unraveled fast. Explosions and gunfire erupted, filling the air with dust and smoke. Jimmy clutched his rifle, exchanging glances with his comrades. They shared the same determination and underlying fear. Then, the unthinkable happened. Amid the chaos, a bomb screamed from the sky, exploding nearby. In that instant, Jimmy felt himself flung into the air, his connection to the ground seemingly severed. When he hit the ground, pain ripped through his chest like nothing he'd ever felt before. His vision blurred, every breath a struggle. Darkness began to close in, and just before everything went black, he saw Ryan's face. It was a reminder of what he fought for, but this time, he felt he wouldn't make it back. When he opened his eyes, he was engulfed in an oppressive darkness, so intense it felt tangible, pressing in from all sides. Every breath felt like a battle as the air grew thick with the stench of burning sulfur and decay. He looked down at the cold, jagged stones underfoot, each one seeming to carry centuries of misery. Taking a shaky step forward, he noticed a faint glow in the distance, a red, ominous light. He soon realized he was surrounded by towering dungeons, where rusted iron bars held countless souls, each enduring a unique form of torture. Some were engulfed in flames, while others were suspended from stone walls, their agonized screams echoing through the oppressive void. As he took in his horrifying surroundings, demons began to emerge from the shadows. They were towering figures, half beast, half man, with twisted bodies and hollow eyes. Each demon clutched a different instrument of torment: chains, whips, hooks. Their very presence was suffocating, making it nearly impossible for Jimmy to breathe as he walked past them, his fear mounting with every step. The demons took sadistic pleasure in torturing the damned souls, who writhed in pain, bearing the marks of their past lives. Here, those marks had become fragile shells of suffering, as some souls were weighed down by the burden of their sins, while others seemed consumed by an insatiable void. As he staggered forward, he noticed a figure approaching, a being unlike the others, cloaked in black with a hood casting its face in shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood, and its voice echoed in the emptiness as it spoke. "Jimmy Mir Tun, we've been expecting you." The figure's voice held a cold, merciless tone, as if it could see into the deepest recesses of his soul. Fear gripped him as he realized this figure seemed to know who he was and why he was there. Is this hell?" Jimmy stammered, trying to suppress the terror in his voice. The figure's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Yes, this is hell, where every soul must face the consequences of its actions." Jimmy's mind reeled. "But, I was just doing my duty," he protested, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that cut through him. "Duty? That's the excuse all warriors give. But here, every dark choice, every selfish act is laid bare. You planted seeds of darkness in your soul, and now you must face what they have grown into." With a wave of its hand, the figure conjured scenes from Jimmy's past. He saw himself in the bloodiest moments of the war, faces of civilians caught in the crossfire, decisions made without regard for the innocent lives lost. These actions fed the darkness in you, the figure said. Jimmy felt a surge of guilt rise within him, heavier than anything he'd ever known. What happens now? He asked, his voice trembling, unsure if he was ready for the answer. The figure's smile grew even colder. Now, you serve 30 years of punishment here, moving through different layers of hell, each one more excruciating than the last. The figure outlined Jimmy's fate. The first 5 years would be spent by the river of fire, where souls burned in an eternal flame that scorched both body and spirit. In that fiery landscape, he encountered figures from his lifetime, including Michael Jackson, his hands charred as remnants of his music mixed with anguished screams. After those years of fiery torment, he was pulled into the frozen dungeon. Here, the unbearable cold seeped into his bones, freezing him in place. Beside him, he saw Kobe Bryant, trapped in glistening ice, his memories playing in endless, frozen loops, his face twisted in regret. Next, he found himself in the pits of regret, where he relived each painful decision and regret, the memories stabbing at his soul. He saw Queen Elizabeth, weighed down by the crown on her head, a symbol of the power that now meant nothing in this place. Her face was etched with sorrow as she remembered her years of reign, realizing the insignificance of earthly power. Moving forward, Jimmy entered the Valley of the Fall, joining other historical figures like Richard Nixon and George W. Bush, who were trapped in an endless descent, forever falling without reaching the ground. They bore expressions of regret and shame, haunted by the choices that had defined them. After 25 years of torment, Jimmy reached the graveyard of souls, surrounded by the spirits of people he had known or impacted through his actions. He saw the faces of friends and comrades he had lost in the war, as well as civilians affected by his decisions. Each time he tried to reach them, they slipped away, trapped in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. Among them, he saw famous politicians, condemned to face the consequences of their decisions, like Ronald Reagan, being questioned relentlessly by a demon. Andrew Jackson stood nearby, haunted by the ghosts of the native people affected by his policies. By the end of his 30 years, Jimmy was left alone in the darkest corner of hell, his spirit broken, his sense of time lost in the endless despair. Just when he had abandoned all hope, a piercing white light appeared, illuminating the darkness of hell. As the light drew closer, he saw a figure emerge, Jesus, his face radiant with both mercy and sorrow. In that moment, every scream and sound of suffering ceased. "Jimmy," Jesus said, his voice calm and full of compassion, "you have suffered here for your sins, but forgiveness is open to all who seek it." Overwhelmed by guilt, Jimmy began to weep, confessing his deepest regrets and sins. Jesus reached out and placed a gentle hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "Forgiveness begins within," he said. "Only when you release the burden of guilt can you find true peace." As he spoke, Jimmy felt his chains fall away, and warmth filled him, lifting the darkness that had gripped his soul. "This is your second chance, Jimmy," Jesus told him, his voice tender but firm. "Use it wisely. Live a life that brings light where once there was darkness." With one final, compassionate look, Jesus extended his hand, and Jimmy felt a profound sense of rebirth. In an instant, he awoke in a hospital bed, surrounded by his family. His son, Ryan, held his hand tightly, his eyes full of relief and love. Tears streamed down Jimmy's face as he realized the miracle he had been given. From that day forward, he resolved to live a life dedicated to compassion, redemption, and purpose, forever grateful for the second chance he had been granted. Jimmy felt forever changed by what he had experienced. His time in hell had burned away any illusions he once held about his own life and actions. The images of the suffering he had seen, the faces of those he had lost, and the burden of his own sins had scarred him deeply, but they had also given him a new understanding of what it meant to live with intention, empathy, and humility. Now, he knew he couldn't go back to his old life as if nothing had happened. Every decision, every interaction took on new meaning, as he realized that each choice could either add to the darkness or bring light into the world. In the weeks that followed his return, Jimmy found himself haunted by flashes of the people he had seen, the former leaders and everyday souls alike, and by the feeling of being surrounded by endless layers of pain. But the memory of Jesus's compassionate gaze and the warmth of that light reminded him that he had been given a rare, miraculous opportunity to make things right. He knew he could never undo what he had done, but he also knew he could spend the rest of his days honoring the lives he had impacted by bringing healing and goodness to those around him. Slowly, Jimmy began sharing his story with close friends and family. Many were skeptical, finding it difficult to believe such an intense experience. But over time, they saw the sincerity in his words and the transformation in his character. The bitterness and anger he once harbored were replaced by a quiet determination to be of service, and to help others find peace and purpose in their lives. Driven by this mission, Jimmy took on new roles in his community, volunteering with local veterans, speaking to young people about the realities of combat, and emphasizing the importance of choices made out of love and compassion, not fear or hatred. His story became one of redemption, not just for himself, but as a reminder for everyone who heard it, that there is always an opportunity to change, to seek forgiveness, and to live with a renewed commitment to goodness. Each night, before he went to sleep, Jimmy would look at the photograph of Ryan, now older and even more full of life, and say a quiet prayer of thanks for the second chance he had been granted. He knew he wasn't perfect and that his journey was far from over, but he also knew that with each passing day, he was walking closer to the light he had once seen, and away from the shadows that had once consumed him.